So thank you all for all being here. We, as we were talking about just a few minutes ago, are really excited about this new release and what's new in risk management. I am joined with Utkarsh today. Utkarsh, want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Utkarsh. I'm part of product management team at ServiceNow. I'm really excited to be here today talking about risk management.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff to talk about. In fact, we have a lot of stuff to talk about in this whole release. We've got, I can show you here, we just had our live on ServiceNow. We've changed from the Ask the Experts to live on ServiceNow. I'm talking about business continuity management last week. So if you didn't see that one, you can dial in and see it on demand. Today, we're talking about risk management, and you can see the long list of features that we're going to be talking about today. Later this week, we're going to be talking about policy and compliance and audit management. Again, we have a lot of really cool features. And we'll follow that up the following week with operational resilience and with business continuity management. I'm sorry, operational resilience and with vendor risk management. And then we'll round it all out by breaking out the DevOps Accelerator, which is an amazing integration between DevOps Config and policy and compliance in September. So we have a lot coming up. We hope you join us for those too. But right now, we want to dive into risk management. So Utkarsh, I'm going to turn it over to you to be able to show us what we've got.
Absolutely. Thanks, Teresa. And I'm sharing my screen. I hope all of us can see it.
You are. It looks wonderful.
Awesome. So as Teresa said, this is a release very, very close to my heart. I think in this release, we tried to base it based on the feedback we got from the customers and from the partners. So thank you, everyone, actually. So for providing us all the feedback, providing us the continuous support, and letting ServiceNow know what has to change, what can be improved. So that's the reason we are the leader in this space. So I really want to thank all of your effort, keeping in with us, with all the development that we have been doing. So really excited to showcase some of the cool new enhancements that we have this release. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, and I'll let the system do most of the talking here, is really the heat map. So some of you may have seen this in our roadmap sessions as well. So in this release, we did some really cool trending and movement on the risk heat map. And the objective is really to automate, digitize your risk reporting. So when you're going into a boardroom or maybe a room full of executives and you want to talk about a risk and they have all kind of questions around a risk. So you should be able to use this, what we call it as a heat map workbench, to actually respond to those questions live in, right? So you don't have to create those PowerPoints that you are creating for the senior management, but they can have it live in the system. So that's the objective with the first feature here. The second thing is more of a theme. You would see us investing in this theme around AI-assisted risk management. So we want to use AI more and more to help our users operationalize and make efficient use of technology in the world of risk management. So one of the features that came in as an ask from customers is really to say if there are hundreds and thousands of risk events, and these risk events are occurring throughout the organization. So there can be cases where your similar risk events are actually reported across different geographies. So how do we give more visibility of these similar risk events to the event owners so that they are not duplicating their effort and they can understand the larger impact that this event may have. So that's a second feature I'm going to demonstrate today. The third thing is really around design and operational effectiveness assessment of controls. So this is again a very strong feedback we got actually from all of you around when we do the Rscas. Sometimes the Rscas has to go very granular, where you're just not assessing the overall mitigation effectiveness of the control, but maybe you're assessing the design and the operational effectiveness, or maybe other factors as well. So now you can do like a multi-factor assessment of controls. And obviously this is configurable. So which means if you don't want to, you can continue doing it as it's today. But if you want to go granular, get to more detailed assessment, you can. So it's really giving that extra power of configurability to you to make that choice. The fourth thing And this is again something which will take our risk assessment engine, the advanced risk assessment engine, in terms of configurability to the next level, is really dynamic and multi-level approval workflow. So this is again something that came across as a strong feedback saying, why is risk assessment approvals not as configurable as some of the other approvals in the platform? So we know ServiceNow for the configurability. We want to make sure we have the same configurations available in our advanced risk assessment as well. So as part of this release, what you can do is you can actually define multi-levels of approval workflow so that if a risk, let's say, is beyond your appetite of the organization, you can actually do 2 or 3 levels or 4 levels of approval. And these can be dynamic too. So like the condition I said, only if it is beyond your risk appetite, then do these 2 levels. So this takes away the noise in terms of reviewing everything and make sure that only the things that needs really management attention are brought up to them and they can focus on it. So this is a very important enhancement from that perspective. And the last couple of them are really enabling the admins as well as users leverage some of the new capabilities in the system better. So what we have done is for the advanced risk assessment setup. So a lot of partners actually gave this feedback to us saying it is actually very, very powerful, the advanced risk assessment. But setting it up, we need visibility to understand, okay, how will this risk assessment look like once you actually trigger it, so that they can make tweaks, they can make changes in the scoring logic or the factor setup. So what you have done is provided like a simulation mode so that you can simulate your risk assessment setup and you can see how the impact is on the overall assessment. And finally, the metrics piece, right? Where this is something we started as a journey in the last release, where we are now going to use our metrics capability for more KRIs and KCI monitoring rather than the indicators, as indicators has been repositioned as automated control test. So in this release, what we did is essentially the out-of-the-box widgets on the overview pages and the home pages, which used to reflect only data from indicators, will now reflect data from metrics on switch of a button. So it's still a choice to you as a customer if you want to leverage metrics or if you want to leverage our indicators functionality. We strongly advocate for the metrics functionality from a product standpoint because that's what it's designed for, but it's still a journey that you can take and take your own sweet time. So I know all of you are very excited by all of these features here. So what I'm going to do is start with the first one here, which is really your heat map, right? So this is let's say the screen for a business or for an operational risk manager, and I'm going to impersonate as a business risk manager too. So one of the things that business risk managers could do that an operational risk manager cannot do is really filter his view of the homepage on the workspace based on the entity he's responsible for. So this is a use case again, which I'm sure all of you would have seen in your respective organizations, where I don't want to see everything, but I really want to see data from my entities, the entities that I am responsible for. So on this page, you can see there's an option to actually filter. In the last release, we could not launch the Heatmap workbench from here. So this is the first thing you'll be able to do. You can actually now launch this cool Heatmap workbench from even the business risk manager workspace. And again, the objective is you launch from there to get into the details of it. So you're seeing the count now, you see the actual risks that are there. And now I have the filters on the top. And so what we did is based on our research we figured out there are 2 or 3 top filters that our customers are generally used. And that's where we brought them up on the top. So the first filter allows you to switch your methodologies across to say, okay, if I want to look at data from an operational risk perspective or enterprise perspective, I can simply use this filter and change my viewpoint here, right? So that's one. The second thing is also a dynamic filter. So a lot of times when you're walking into a room, like it said, you don't want to talk about all of the risk in your organization. So what they're really interested in then seeing what are my top 20 risks. So your heat map should only be filtered based on this. So now if you see what the heat map did is took away the noise from your actual risk that you need to focus on. So when you're having this conversation with your senior management, what you could simply do is just click on this risk, and now this is going to bring in all the information around this particular risk, right? So you can go risk by risk, get into details, have that conversation, capture your output here, right? And move to the next one. So that's the top risk filter here. The second filter you would observe is ability to filter for a particular entity. For example, let's say my senior management says, hey, let's start with focusing on Acme CD Europe, and let's see what are the top risks within Acme CD Europe that we need to worry about. So you can start by that conversation across. And the wonderful thing about this is it's just not bringing your entity, which is Acme CD Europe, but also all the downstream within it, because we understand you're not just responsible for this entity, but all the corresponding downstream. So risk is composed of all those different areas. And on the right, you would see still some preferences. For example, if you want to toggle between a name view to an index view, stuff like it, or from inherent to residual. So let me do one thing now. So let's say I'm talking about my enterprise risk management profile, and I'm talking to all these stakeholders in my organization. And generally, a lot of times they would have this conversation where they would talk about a risk, let's say availability of training content as a risk, and you want to see all the details around it. So you can see on the right-hand side panel, you have the complete 360-degree view of a risk. So it talks about who the owner is, which entity is it in, what's my risk trend, both inherent and residual, and what are we doing about risk, right? So in this case, there is no response because this is in a green zone. So we don't need a risk response necessarily for this risk. But if it was not, you could actually go ahead and do that. Now, in this case, what you can do is you can also see the movement. So for example, I want to see how the risk has changed from inherent to residual. So you can see nicely the trend of the risk from inherent to residual here. Or you can even look at last 5 assessments, right, on how you have performed around this risk. So the first time this risk was assessed was in January 22, but at the current moment, it's July 22. So definitely a lot of work has been done on this risk, and I can see how the controls have mitigated the impact and likelihood right over the last 6 months when we reassess this risk. So it gives a lot of talking points for you to justify all the costs around the controls, how we have been managing this risk better over the period of time, and what the trend is. So this drives actions in terms of where we want to see. Okay, I see some questions, Tessa. So should we take them up now?
Actually, I was gonna say, the one question is actually something we can actually address a little bit later. But we've got someone who raised their hand. I forgot to mention at the very beginning, if you guys have a question, please put it in the Q&A and we'll make sure we get to it. We do want to make sure we get your questions. We want to make this interactive because this is something we're really excited about. And you can see there's a ton of things in here. But put it in the Q&A and we'll get your questions answered.
Awesome. Okay. So this is the first thing, and really it's an important visualization just to communicate the risk profile across, and this is a strong differentiation for us. We haven't seen any other competitors do things like this. And one thing, although I would mention, is in terms of the risk movement, the risk movement is only available for methodologies where inherent and residual risk is based on the same factors. So if you are reassessing the residual based on the impact and likelihood, that is when we could plot the risk movement. But if it's not, then it's difficult to actually visualize it because your x-axis and y-axis are not same for inherent and residual. So that's why you cannot actually plot them on the similar heat map chart. So for those methodologies, you would not see this option for risk movement, but the trend will be always available for you. So you could simply see the trend across multiple assessments that you're seeing here. So,
I
think
this is really, I think what's important about this one or really interesting about this one is if you've got, for example, 3 risks that are in that sort of medium zone, and you're not sure which ones you want to start working on first, you can see this trend and it's going to help you make that decision. I mean, not knowing how the risk is moving, that doesn't help you at all determine what you should be doing. So risk-informed decisions,
absolutely.
That's what we're really about here. And I think this is just amazing. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention was, and I don't know if you're going to mention this later on, but I don't know if anybody noticed, when Utkarsh was dropping down to figure out who he wanted to be, you can select from a variety of different roles. You've got the enterprise risk manager, he's on now. He was the business risk manager previously. We've got operational risk managers in there. You can really tailor your view to what you care about. and what matters to you to help you do your job more efficiently. So I think that is just, it's amazing. And I hope everybody is excited about the fact that they can get a little bit more granular in their jobs.
Absolutely, it is. I think one of the key things that I really got a good feedback from customers around this is the the power of automation and the redundancy in their day-to-day work that we have been able to kind of simplify, right? Because a lot of them, what they were doing was they were creating these kind of reports offline, and they told that it takes us for somewhere around 1 to 2 weeks in every 3 months, right, to actually create this. Now that is available in the system, I could simply walk into the room with the system and have that conversation. So that simplifies their risk reporting a lot.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Awesome. So the second thing I want to really talk about is, and I'm going to switch my domain across or my persona across to an operational risk manager for this, is really AI assisted risk management. So you would see this, like I just said, like more of a theme, right, running across not just in this release, but multiple releases. And the objective is to build a story, right, to help our customers manage their risk, the leveraging AI. So we don't want to replace the humans, but we want to make their life better. We want to make sure we are providing the AI assistance to drive more insights from the tool. So that's the objective that we have. Now, for this, what we did is we actually created, we leverage our predictive intelligence engine and on the risk event capability, because that's one of the area we have been seeing customers volumes for AI. We brought in a simple use case, which is basically helping users identify what the similar risk events are. So let's say there's a risk event around company director having fraudulent credentials. And I'm Andrew Taylor, who's an operational risk manager. I'm working on this risk event. But when I'm working on this risk event, I also need to see if there are similar risk events that are popping up across the organization. So I can see one such event, which is happening across for my Acme Consumer Durable organization. So here's a duplicate one, in fact. So you have this event in Acme Incorporation here, but there's another one here in Acme Consumer Durable. So what you want to do is you want to associate them so that you can analyze the true impact of this event. And also it's a regulatory mandate, really. It's a regulator ask to say if you have similar risk events happening across the organization, you should actually link them. So a lot of times what they were doing is they were actually going into this tab called similar risk events if AI was not there, then clicking on this ad, looking for simple text-based search to see, oh, if there are duplicates like these and stuff like it. So it took a lot of pain again for the users to do this. But now this AI engine is actually popping up these similar risk events. And all I need to do is just quickly go through this event that has been showcased, understand what this event is. And if I just click on this action here, it's going to establish that relationship across. So now when I report this risk event and when I analyze this risk event, I know there's a similar risk event happening, not just in my entity, but another entity around Acme Consumer Durable. So those people get notified as well. So that's how we want to leverage AI to make people's life simpler and make sure if they are surfacing the right information across the platform for them.
So we do have a question here. So I know we have to train the AI a little bit, but the question is, on what basis does the AI engine group similar risk events?
So that's a wonderful question, Teresa. So that's where the power of the predictive intelligence solution comes in from the Now platform. Right now, we are basing it based on the name and description fields. But a lot of times, what I've seen in real life is based on the customer data, you may want to tweak the model across, right? So maybe you have additional attributes like cause, consequence, or maybe the category of the event that could be used for the model to better predict what these similar risk events are. And that's what we have done here. I'll quickly showcase where the solution definition is. So for some of my practitioners friend who are doing the implementation for the customers, where they run into this scenario and the customer says, hey, look, this AI model needs to be retweaked. So that's where they can go and actually do that. So if you go into predictive intelligence, and if I go into similarity solution definition, and you can see the similarity solution definition for risk events. So the features out of the box that we are training the solution definition is for name and description, but you can add more. So if you see, test fields are name and description, as well as the fields or the features, as we call it in AI, are name and description. So both of them, you can actually add more, tweak this model across based on your data set here.
Great. All right. That's perfect. Now the next question, I actually like this question a lot because it allows us to plug a couple of other things that we do. So are risk events entered manually or automatically created from another module in ServiceNow? So I like that one because the first thing I want to say is, we do have this amazing employee center where you can do, for employees, anybody can enter a risk event. So a lot of times, we're not going to talk about that much today, but I did want to plug that one before you answer the question the rest of the way.
Absolutely, Teresa. I think this is a wonderful question. And what we have done as a platform is we have integrated this risk event across the platform. So imagine you're working on a customer case and he files a class action lawsuit on you. That could be a potential risk event. So on click of an action, which we call it as a report or risk event, you can actually copy data from your case management application, or let's say major incidents, into the risk event database. Or it could be even manual, right? So we want all our employees, like one of the bank I was working with, and they said, we want all our branches to actually report all their events. So they want to report all their risk events, even if it means a dollar loss of $100, we want to make sure all our employees are reporting it and we are getting visibility into them. So anything, it could be automated, like I just said, where you're working on a case task, or maybe you're working on an incident and you have a feel that, yes, this could be a risk event, so you can do that. Or it could be even like from the employee center where employees are going in and just reporting a risk event. They're not sure whether it's a risk event or not, but you want to make sure you report it and then somebody can review and triage it. So both possibilities exist in the platform.
Yeah, you can even use the chatbot, which I think is pretty neat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It asks you questions and you just answer the questions. What day did it happen? What is it called? Who's involved? It's super simple. I also like the fact that we've got the different buttons on different applications. So you've got the button on the vulnerability response application you can use. You've got the button on the, it's pretty much everywhere. And the idea is that anybody should be able to do this. And then of course you can automate it through the other means too. So
it could be on the go as well, on the mobile, right?
On the mobile too, yeah.
Yeah. Right, absolutely.
That's the questions for this one.
Awesome. Anything else that I could take up right now?
I don't think so. I think we can go to the next one. I forgot what that was.
Awesome. Yeah. So the next one I'm going to showcase is really what we call it as a design and operational effectiveness assessment. And I'm just going to take one slide. I know nobody likes slides, so I'm trying to reduce the number of slides we use, but I really want to highlight this one. So what we want to do is, when you're assessing your controls, right? So the feedback we really got from the customers and partners is, we only were allowing assessment of controls based on single factors, which means they were only able to understand whether the control is mitigating the risk or not. But they wanted to do one level down and understand whether it's a design which is failing, or whether it's the operational effectiveness which is failing. So that's one side of the equation. Or it could be even deeper, where somebody may say, oh, whether it's the implementation or it's a policies that we have. So really a lot of times customers, what they were doing is they were asking these bunch of 3 or 4 questions to assess the controls. And based on that, they were trying to do their Rscas in their ARA journey. So they had to do this outside in the product. So they were either adding fields on the form, on the control record, or maybe using our control registration workflow, but the experience was not seamless. So they wanted everything in one screen where they assess the inherent risk, they assess the controls, and then they move to the residual. So that's what we are looking to do with this one here, where you can now assess each control based on multiple criteria. I'm just calling them design and operational effectiveness because that's the most frequently used ones. But you can actually do this based on multiple other criteria as well. So it's a very simple setup step, where all you need to do is you need to first define the factors which will be used for your assessment of each control. So it could be your design effectiveness, your operational effectiveness, like I was talking about, and then group them into what we call it as a group factor, right? So this way, all of these factors can be grouped into one major factor that will be used for the assessment of the actual control. And that is something you can pick up in your risk assessment methodology setup. So I'll show you an out of the box methodology, which you are shipping as demo data so that you have a reference to how it works. But the key point of note is this only works for scenarios where you're doing individual assessment of controls, right? Because if you're doing control environment assessment, you're not really assessing each and every control, but all you're doing is actually just looking at the overall environment together. So that's the reason this option is only available for those areas. So once you set up the factors, the individual factors, group them into one group factor, you can select that factor out, and then you can actually define the scoring logic to say, okay, how should my overall control effectiveness value should be computed, and then publish that methodology across. So this is a very simple 7-step process that you have. So if you follow this, you should be able to do this live in the system as well. And I'm going to showcase that right now in the system on how it works. So what we did is I impersonated as a risk admin here, and I go into my risk assessment methodologies. So one of the pre-ship methodology you will see is what we call it as a business Rscsa. So here's my methodology around business Rscsa. And you can see in this methodology, I'm assessing my inherent risk, my controls, my residual. And if I go into controls, I see that the control effectiveness is primarily based on individual assessment of the controls. And here, before August, before this release, the version 15 of the store application that we have, you could only select manual factors. You cannot select a group factor. So now you could also select a group factor. So in this case, this is a group factor, which we have created called control effectiveness. And if I open this group factor up, you can see this itself is composed of two manual factors. One is a design effectiveness, and the other one is an operational effectiveness. And then you can define the formula across to say, how are you computing this? I'll show you how all of this impacts the life of a risk assessor, but I wanted to just showcase how the setup has changed, right? Because a lot of you I know will be doing these setups, and I thought it will be good for you guys to see how the power is. So this is where you can define once your product is computed, what your rating criteria is, and everything else remains the same. So you can then define how is it computed, like an average of all controls, and then the rating criteria across. But this is what changes, right? So now instead of selecting just one manual factor, you can also select a group factor. A group factor can have automated factors, or it could have manual factors within it. So all that power is up to you to decide on how you want to model it across. I see some raised hands. Tessa, do you want to quickly take up question if there is anything?
Yeah, we've got a question. I'm not sure it applies directly to this, but are there any plans or options to perform or capture target risk scores?
Oh, yes. Probably, I mean, that's one of the things we have from the roadmap perspective. I don't know if we did attend the roadmap session. So where we did showcase when are we planning to enhance it for target risk. So it's definitely on the roadmap. We're looking at it from a rough timeline perspective, somewhere around Feb next year, or Feb next to next year. So which is Feb 24 is what we are looking at this point of time.
Perfect. And if anyone has any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I think maybe the next question we'll be able to talk about when you talk about dynamic approval workflows. Is that our next topic?
Yes, definitely. I just want to showcase how this impacts my risk assessor, right? So I'll just close this off and then move to the dynamic approval workflow here. Okay, so what I've done is I have moved back into my workspace as an operational risk manager, and I'll showcase how the risk assessment looks like when you have this option enabled. So I'm gonna go into my risk, and let's say I'm talking about a risk around offering a bribe and return for overlooking illegal activity. And now when I click on this action to assess, I'm gonna specify an approver here, specify users, approver as the same person here for now. It creates an assessment. I could simply open this assessment up to perform it. And just to save time, I'm going to copy over the results so that I can show you what changed, right? So if I move to my inherent assessment is going to be the same. Nothing is going to change here. But if I move to my control environment assessment, you would see there are a bunch of controls, in fact, 3 of them that I want to assess. And for each of the controls, I can now assess the design and operational effectiveness. So remember the setup part I was showcasing, where you were setting up saying this is a group factor. Within the group factor, you have the design effectiveness and operational effectiveness. This is where it impacts. So you in this case it's just 2, but you can have multiple of them too. So you can say how my design effectiveness is, how my operational effectiveness is, and you can do this for each control. So a lot of times when you're focusing on your first line, you want to do like a quick control self-assessment for them, right? To understand how the risk profile changes, you could use this capability now for them to do a more granular assessment and give you visibility into whether it's the design, whether it's the operational effectiveness of controls that needs to be fixed. So it's really enabling that more granular control assessment and making sure, yes, you have the understanding of what needs to be improved in order to mitigate that risk further. So
You
this
can
is the
do
impact you would see.
you can do each of the different controls, but then it rolls up, right, to an overall
Yes,
score. So I can
absolutely.
see two
Yes,
controls here, whistleblowing and process
yes,
to ensure managers, and I'm answering each of them
yes.
individually. But then that rolls up to an overall effectiveness, operating effectiveness score, and design effectiveness score.
Absolutely, absolutely, it is. So
Yeah,
spot
okay.
on. So that's where I was saying it's driving that granular assessment.
Right.
So you can see all these 3 controls are ineffective, and you can see this here too, right? So your design was ineffective, your operation was ineffective. That's why it's ineffective. If I'm supposed to change that and maybe make some of them as effective, then you would see the entire recomputation happening, and that would recompute and maybe drive the residual risk a bit down.
So the nice thing then is, before you might have had these 3 controls, but you didn't realize which ones were effective or not effective. But in this case, you can actually say it's, it's control, it's a whistleblowing control. That's the problem.
Yeah,
So I need to go fix that. And that's what's causing
absolutely.
my ineffective score.
Yeah. And within that, whether it's a design, which means it's not been designed well, or is it the
Right.
operational environment,
Yes,
right? What's
exactly.
the core of that problem? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. We have a question. Can you use automated factors for calculating the control scores, pulling data from
Absolutely.
self-evaluations or audit results and to show up on an Rscsa screen similar to the risk scores?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it could be manual or it could be even an automated factor here. So both possibilities exist. We're just providing that flexibility for you to decide depending on your organizational processes.
Yeah, I think the key word here is flexibility. Flexibility. Everyone's got their own processes and the way they want to do things. Some are more mature than others.
Absolutely.
Some people are still on that journey. It's meeting
Yeah.
people where they're at and giving the ability
Yeah.
to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of their programs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's a journey, like you just said, right? It's a journey. Some customers are just starting it. Maybe they would start manual. Others are maybe at a high level. They would automate, look to automate as far as possible. So the tool meets you where you are, right? So you don't have to be stuck with one out of the box things, but you can take the tool forward in your journey, reconfigure it as you need during your journey.
Yeah, and someone asked another question, and I want to kind of twist the question a little bit. Has anyone leveraged a risk assessment like a HITRUST or other third-party certification as a framework for tracking the IT controls? And I think one of the things we are trying to do is use, for example, the CIS. We've got the control accelerators, the cybersecurity control accelerators that we've packaged up for CIS to be able to give people that jump start on being able to create their program, define their policies, assign their risks and controls and all of that. I know HITRUST is something we've been talking to. I don't think we've actually got there yet because it's obviously needs to be agreed on both parties. But it is something that we're doing, is we're looking at these different frameworks and trying to create what we're calling accelerators, trying to create accelerators for them.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I've seen some customers definitely using the AR engine for that when they want to do their risk assessments And then a lot of times, because of the kind of volumes they deal with, they leverage the automated factors to pull in data from ServiceNow or outside ServiceNow to continuously do risk assessment, monitor the residual risk profile. So I think it's a really good better together with all the data coming in from other sources as well as within ServiceNow, and then automating your residual risk profile and giving you a near real-time view of how your risk is changing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So we're going in that direction for sure. All
Awesome.
right.
So this was the one that I wanted to. So I think there was a question around this. So what the next feature I'm going to talk about is really around your approval workflows, right? So remember, we talked about ARA being the platform for risk assessments, right? So it's not just focusing on IT risk, op risk. We want to be providing an integrated risk assessment platform for our customers, which means you can do multi-facet risk assessments, and there could be different kinds of risk assessments you're doing in your organization. So one of the things that came forward for that is it has all the power, but then when it comes to review and approval workflow, it's really limited because you just have out of the box one level of approval that it has to go through. If you want multiple levels, it doesn't work. It cannot be dynamic, which means either you have to review everything or you cannot review anything. So all of that feedback that you guys have provided, that's what gets baked into this feature for providing you that flexibility again, right? To choose whether you want to do multi levels of approvals, what the conditions are as to when it should kick on. And here's a sample use case that I think is a very realistic one. So a lot of times, let's say I'm doing three kinds of risk assessment. So I can create three different risk assessment methodologies, as we call it. One is an IT risk assessment, another one is an operational risk assessment, and the third one is an enterprise risk assessment. When it talks about an IT risk assessment, I want at least two levels of assessment for approvals, one by the owners of, let's say, business application or the IT assets, and the second one is by IT risk managers. So they are reviewing and signing off everything. But then if your risk score crosses a threshold of 16, which let's say is the risk appetite for your organization when it comes to IT risk management, you want head of IT risk to review and sign off to that too, right? So it's really the third level is conditional and dynamic from that perspective. So only if your risk score crosses a threshold of 16, you want to do that. While when we talk about operational risk assessment, let's say it's a simple two-step process where you have level one as your business owners or your entity owners, and then level two is by op risk team, right? So simple, no dynamic, but it's two levels. IT risk three levels, op risk two levels, and then we have enterprise risk because these are ERM managers who are doing like more of a strategic risk assessment. They've already maybe reviewed it offline or whatever is the case. They don't want to do any approvals in the system, right? So you could do all three now within the same platform, right? So you are configuring your methodologies, but you are now also configuring your approval workflow. And the way we have done this is leveraging using one of our application that we developed in BCM, which we call it as an approval configurator. And I'll show you how it works. So if I impersonate as a risk admin, sorry.
No worries. We actually have a question. So when you're talking through this, the question is, can you delegate the capability? So for example, some of the risk owners are senior stakeholders. They will never perform any assessments, but they want to be able to delegate the capability to ensure that risk owners are accountable, but delegates are responsible for a particular risk.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the new features that we released in the March release was delegation of risk assessment. So you could actually delegate your risk assessments to other stakeholders on the organization. And now, because we have moved to what we call it as a platform approval engine, essentially, right? So this also offers approval in, all those new features like delegation, approval over email. So all that now works even for risk assessment approvals. So you can absolutely do that.
And then, is it possible to have approvals with an ERM? I mean, you can always have approvals. I mean, you don't. There's no restrictions on it. It's just that in general, enterprise
Yeah,
risk teams, they don't require approvals.
yeah, yeah. This is a sample scenario. This is a possible business scenario that I just took, where your ERM team maybe does not want to do approvals, right? But if they want to, absolutely they can. And you're not going to stop that. So that's where the power of the flexibility comes in. So this is what you will see. There's something called as an approval configuration. So if you go into the approval configuration, you'll see a record called Advanced Risk Assessment Approval that is going to be available to all of you now. And what we are doing is out of the box, we are shipping one level of approval by default. Now, the reason for that is we want to ensure backward compatibility. So customers who are used to doing one levels of approval, they can continue doing that single level of approval. But if they want to do additional levels of approval, like in the case today, I wanted to do that. So what I did is created new set of records here. So this is my level 2 approval, where I said the level 2 approval will only kick in for risk assessments with a risk score of 6 and above, right? As an example. So it's, sorry, 5 and above, in fact. So it doesn't apply to all of the risk assessments. So if your risk score is below 5, I don't want to do level 2. And in case the level 2 happens, it should go to this group called IT Risk Manager. And here, if you see, there's a lot of power. You could just say, is it a specific approver? Is it a dynamic approver? Or also, is it any one of them or all of them, right? So even within level 2, there can be multiple people who are providing these approvals. So, I mean, just that power that you get using this approval configurator is amazing. And I don't think there's a workflow that you want to configure that you cannot actually model this across in this rule engine here.
And you
So a
don't,
lot of things
I mean, you don't need to use that filter. Basically, you could have no filter conditions at all and still have
absolutely.
another approval as a level 2 approval.
Yes, absolutely. So that filter is only for cases where we want to do dynamic approvals based on certain criteria, right? So if I wanted, I always want level 2 to be always there, I could simply take that filter away and just cross this out as an example, right? Yeah. So if you see here now, this is 3 levels of approval. So beyond 5, I said 2, which is your IT risk manager. But here, if the score goes beyond 15, which is, let's say, our appetite of the organization, it's Andrew Taylor who is going to provide the sign off. And there's just one possibility, right? I'm saying that, yeah, residual score is this. It could be other criteria. So whatever criteria you need, be it your persona who is doing the risk assessment, or maybe like the methodology I talk about, or maybe any kind of criteria. So anything you want your criteria or your things to drive your approval workflow, you could simply specify in this filter condition here, and that would drive your entire workflow of your approvals here. So you don't have to actually codify anything. It's just digitizing this, your rules of approvals, and the system will take care of everything for you.
And
I'll showcase now.
Yeah, I think the answer to this one question here, I think you answered it probably as number 2, but can approvals be sent to a user within a reference field? For example, a user manager.
Absolutely. Yes,
I think
yes,
we
absolutely.
showed that in the previous example.
Yeah. So if you just change the condition here, and so instead of saying specific approvers, if you make it dynamic, it's going to allow you to select the field from a table. It could be your user table, it could be any other table, or we even risk assessment table. So that's where the dynamic approvers comes in. So I'll show you the level 1 configuration, and that will. So one of the challenge, it's an interesting one, right? So when I was talking about this feature, one of the challenges that developers told me is, hey, Utkarsh, you have this current configurations that we have provided, and customers have maintained all this data. Where should we allow these customers to actually take that data and configure it? So it's not that it's a brand new product, we have the power. So that's where we actually leverage this functionality within this approval configurator to say, because your level 1s are probably already maintained in the assessment scope or within the model windows that you're having, you want to pick up right from there. So if you look at it, what it's doing is it's picking up from a particular source, which is your risk assessment, and it's using this field called approver or approver group for your level ones. So you could really simplify that same logic to use it from other areas too.
Perfect. I think, so I've got a question here, and I think this is a clarification. So thank you so very much for clarifying. I got the question wrong. So I'm going to read it exactly so I can get it right this time. I was not referring to risk by risk delegation. Instead, at a risk scoping level, where I'm defining the scope, assessors, approvers, etc. I want to, what I would want to define the delegates. If I go that way, I would end up assigning 100 delegates 100 times, which is a huge time-consuming task.
Okay. No, that's an interesting ask. I would strongly advocate to use our idea portal for logging this idea request, and we'll definitely look at it from a roadmap perspective. But that's not something we support as of today. Thanks for clarifying that.
So that, yeah, and thank you for those ideas, because those are the kind of things that we can put in our list to be able to look at for future releases.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm just going to showcase now how it looks and feels on the assessment experience itself, this dynamic multi-level of approvals. So I go into my workspace and probably I'll go to the same assessment that I was working on. So I can go into my task inbox and I will see my task that I was actually working on the risk assessment perspective. So I could filter based on the in-progress risk assessments here. And we were talking about this one here, right? So I'm just going to kick off the approval workflow. So I did my inherent assessment, I did my controls, I did my residual. So if you see the score, the residual risk score is 9, which means based on the setup that I did, it should actually go to 2 levels of approvals. And the system will showcase me that. So I'm just going to provide a mitigation plan here and kick off my approval. Maybe some comments for my approvers. So now, previously, while the approvers were shown on the bottom screen, now that can be multiple. So what we did is from a UI perspective, there's a new tab, which will showcase that there are 2 levels of approvals. And on level 1, it has gone to end retailer, because that is the user I have specified in the model window when I was initiating the risk assessment. That's why, and it's the same user who has done the assessment. So it's a self-assess or self-approve scenario here, just for the walkthrough today. So I approved it, right? And now if you see, it will trigger the next level of approval, which is your level 2 approvals. So I'm just going to refresh this out because it does have a bit of a time lag here. So if you can see now that it has gone to 3 people, it has gone to an IT risk manager, it has gone to end retailer, which is this guy here, and it has also gone to Karen Zombo. And either of them can actually approve it. So I'm going to still use the same person here and approve this across. And if you'll see, automatically it takes away the task from other 2. So that's where that configuration around whether it's a specific user or all of them comes into play. So I had said, yes, any one of them. So therefore, any one of them can actually do a level 2 as well here. And now your assessment is approved. You can look at who approved it at what point of time and stuff like it, what comments that they give. So everything is now dynamic from that perspective.
That's fantastic. So it gives you the flexibility to set the approvers the way you want to set the approvers. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We do have a question, and I feel like I should know the answer to this question, and I'm not sure you know the answer to this question. It's about the approval workflows. We've got it for risk, but do we have approval workflows for like policy exceptions? I feel like we do.
Yeah, we already have approval workflows for policy exceptions, for risk events, and multiple other areas too, right? I mean, it's not just risk assessment, you have the approval workflow. A lot of IRM products, right, are now moving towards this approval configurator as a single application to give more power of flexibility, right? So a lot of them still requires either a flow designer or maybe some kind of codification if you want to modify it. So that's the journey you would see all the different workflows within IRM take, where all of them will move towards this approval configurator. but most of them have their approval workflows in place already.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes, and I think we've got about 2 features left to go through, right?
Absolutely, Tessa, you're spot on. So I'm going to use now an interesting bit of a feature, which is really risk assessment simulation. And this is again based on my conversation with all the partners, all the people who are setting up risk assessment. So one of the pains they constantly expressed is we don't get to see a risk assessment until unless we publish the methodology. And unfortunately, once you publish it, you cannot modify it because yes, we understand there has to be data sanity. It cannot change because you want to validate. Yes, what has been done the risk assessment on is something you actually validate across from an audit standpoint, right? So for that reason, there was a need that always came up where we said, okay, I need like a simulated risk assessment. I want to see how this risk assessment will appear on the form before even I publish the methodology. So let's imagine a scenario. I'm a risk admin. I have this business Rscsa. Now, what I need to do is probably modify or create a new version of this business Rscsa by modifying certain things. But I'm not sure whether what I'm doing is correct or not, whether what I mean, and I want to make sure I'm able to like plug and play, right? I really play around like a demo environment or stuff like it. So I could create a copy of this and call it business Rscsa 3. And this time in my inherent assessment, instead of actually doing a product, let's say, right? I want to do maybe a sum of factors for whatever reason. So I could simply modify the formula, publish this across for me. If you see now what has happened is within the risk assessment methodology here, I just need to republish the residual assessment because you just changed the inherent assessment. So I'm going to republish the residual assessment. But now in my RAM, I have not yet published this methodology. I'm getting this action to simulate. And now I can select a risk. Let's say I pick up a risk within one of the entities, and let's pick up the same risk, offering a bribe, and I want to assess it, right? And if I have my workspaces installed, which means I've migrated to the new interface, the system is going to take me to the new interface. If it's not, then it's going to go to the classic interface. And it actually showcases, yeah, this is a simulated assessment, which means it's not going to impact your risk reporting. So it's not going to be used for risk aggregation, and it will be deleted once your methodology is published. But within the assessment, I can see everything. I can see how the assessments will be, how the scoring logic will be, and I can make edits, right? So I can make edits, resimulate it, and again, validate whether I'm doing something which is right or wrong. So it's really taking that risk admin to a path where you are able to see the end results, make modifications, right? And then helping him set up the risk assessment system, right, for your respective organization, right? So that's the power we are again giving to a risk admin so that he sees the end results and make modifications as he go on in this journey of risk assessment. And the beauty of this is it's not just the risk assessment workflow, it's the complete end-to-end workflow, which means you can simulate your approvals, you can simulate your risk response workflow. So a complete risk assessment and all the connected bits of it is actually simulated so that you can validate whatever you have done the setup is correct or not.
Makes it a lot
So
easier. It makes it a lot easier
absolutely.
to do another or do new risk assessment methodologies and implement the risk assessments.
Absolutely. That's the end goal, Ted. So we want to really take our customers through that journey where we are able to guide them step by step. And you'll see that as a constant investment from us going forward as well. Yeah. So this is a simulated assessment that we have, and I can go back. Like I said, I could further make edits. So for example, let's say no, sum was not the right thing to do. I can again change it back to maybe product. Publish it again, and again simulate. Now, one of the things that I'll tell is you could use this for manual factors, but you could also use this for automated factors. So one of the constant feedback, again, I got from customers and partners is when we do these automated factors, we want to see whether the script we wrote or whether the logic we wrote is working correctly or not in the automated factors. So you could use this functionality for that too. So you could, if you have automated factors and if you want to see that for particular risk, whether they are fetching the right results or not. So you could really have this kind of a simulation mode for that too. So it's really that strong power that you can now use to validate before it goes live in production.
That's fantastic. Yep. I like the fact that you could do both manual and automated. Very good. We don't have any questions on that one. Pretty straightforward.
Awesome, I know. Yeah, and I know we are almost on top of the hour. So I'm going to talk about the last feature. I don't know how many of you have seen the metrics functionality from ServiceNow so far, but if you have not, I would strongly advocate to see that across, because that's our future for our KRIs and KCIs, where you want to do threshold-based risk and control monitoring on a continuous basis. And it's really cool. A lot of things that were not available to us in the indicators are now available in the metrics functionality. And in order to further embed metrics, what we did is we actually provided a configuration path. So similar to how we provided a configuration path for customers from classic risk to advanced risk, we have created a configuration path or a migration path for customers to leverage the metrics functionality. So if you go into advanced risk assessment properties, you now have a new property where customers can say, I want to migrate from indicators to metrics. And once they do that, what we will assume is all of your data that you were managing using indicators will now be managed using metrics. And therefore, in your workspace experiences, in terms of the overview pages as well as the home pages, whatever widgets used to display data from indicators as a data source will now automatically replace and take the data source from their metrics table. For example, here, so for example, there are 3 KRI breaches, right? As well as you have your KRIs and KCIs based on different red, amber, green status. So you can see there are 2 amber metrics. There's a 1 metric which is red. If I simply click on this, I can see what that metric is, open this up, right? And look at the details here. So all of your overview pages, all of your home pages will now get data from the metrics as a data source instead of indicators. Now, important point to note, indicators is not going to be deprecated. It's going to be repositioned as a continuous control assessment. So it's going to be very, very compliance focused, while metrics is a functionality that will be used for your KRIs, KCIs from your IT risk and operational risk standpoint. From your risk standpoint, therefore, we're going to leverage more metrics. But from your compliance perspective, as well as your continuous control assessment perspective, we're going to leverage our indicators capability for it. So if you have that conversation with your customers, keep this point in mind.
Yeah, and you've got on the heat map, I think you show all the different risk events, you show the metrics, you show indicators too, from assessments, so you show it all kind of on the heat map, so people get that visual of everything on the heat map.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I know we are almost on top of the hour, but that's all I wanted to showcase today. I hope you find these features useful. And as always, if you have feedback, please reach out to me or Teresa and keep the feedback flowing.
Absolutely. I'm going to snag the screen back here and just kind of wrap it up. We have one more question while we're wrapping this up. This could be a roadmap question. And it might be covered, but I'm interested to know how to do risk assessments on active money laundering and fraud risks. Is there a store app or anything coming in the future, or can we do it with our own product?
Oh, you can absolutely do it in the product, right? So I've seen some customers using our product for fraud risk assessment. So I'm happy to connect offline on what is done and stuff like that. It's a very similar process essentially.
Yeah, we have your contact information. Thank you so very much. I've put in the chat the links to some of the on-demand recordings. You'll have this one and you have some other ones that are already out there. But you can also visit us on our servicenow.com/risk page, connect with other community. And then this also is a QRC code for you to be able to get to that on-demand webinars that we've been talking about, which will be popping up here soon for this one. Thank you so very much to everybody. I really appreciate all of your time and energy. Thank you so much, Utkarsh, for joining us and running us through all of this. It was a lot, and it's really exciting, and I expect to see more next time.